Hello and welcome to Validator Roadmap. My name is Kevin, and I run a company called Throbac Labs. We're a small crypto infrastructure provider attempting to validate on Solana. The goal of this podcast is to illuminate the process of establishing a validator on Solana through our firsthand experience. The journey is broken down into 3 parts: before, during, and after. Over the past 3 months, we've tested our expectations. We've met dozens of folks all over the Solana ecosystem. We set up, deployed, and battle tested our validator. We made mistakes and asked questions that revealed how much we still have to learn. The kind of stunningly aloof questions that, in retrospect, feel like walking face first into a glass door that you just didn't see. But we jammed some rolled gauze into our nosebleeds and kept it moving. So, where does that leave us? As I mentioned in the tagline, our goal is to showcase what it is really like to validate on Solana, warts and all. That conversation wouldn't be complete without an earnest discussion of the financial end of the equation. And the first variable in that equation for the independent validator is the stake pool. For the unfamiliar, stake pools are a lot like they sound. Pools of stake that are programmatically redistributed to a multitude of validators. They allow users to delegate their stake across multiple validators without having to manage or monitor the performance of individual validators. Stake pools present a great solution for big problems facing both validators and proof-of-stake networks more broadly. For validators, as we've intimated, getting delegations is a difficult task. Like any business just starting out, no one knows who you are, and quite frankly, no one gives a shit. Stake pools offer a way to get off zero, to amass stake based on performance alone, not the size of your audience or value of your relationships. For proof-of-stake blockchains, stake pools act as a bulwark against the natural tendency of centralization. They simplify what can be an onerous decision process for delegators and allow their stake to be optimally distributed. Stake pools delegate to a set number of validators based on how much they have available. If a stake pool selected too many validators, for example, delegations would be spread too thin to add any value. To determine which validators receive delegations, stake pools monitor the number of credits a validator receives during an epoch. Here's Lucio, co-founder of Marinade, the largest stake pool on Solana, breaking down how credits work.
Let me give you an example. Our base measurement is called credits observed. You get a credit when you land a vote, when you are contributing to consensus. A standard norm number for credits is, for example, during an epoch, 300,000. So if you are a well-performing validator with 10% commission and 300,000 credits, we consider this 10% commission as, let's say, discounting from credits. But because credits later are translated into staking reward. So if you have a 10% commission, you are at the same position of a 0% commission validator that was performing at 270,000 credits.
To recap, credits are earned for each correct vote that a validator makes and commits. Stake pools typically use a formula for performance that is number of credits in an epoch times commission rate. So, a lower commission helps with this performance calculation, but the difference of a few percentage points likely won't be the root cause of any credit issues. I feel like I can hear myself saying that in an Italian accent about a sports book in North Jersey. Anyway, credits aren't the only metric. Stake pools also consider a few other factors, typically in the interest of decentralization, such as excluding validators that comprise the top 33% of stake, also known as the Nakamoto coefficient, as well as concentration of data centers. I asked Jan and Lucio from Marinade to explain their onboarding and selection process in a bit more detail, and it's pretty hands-off.
You don't have to apply anywhere. There's no whitelist. Just perform well, update your validator, leave your machine out of concentrated geolocations, and the stake will come.
You need also to have at least 100 sol stake. we do a balance between commission and performance. Even if you, let's say, if you have 5% commission and you are in a very, let's say, not so concentrated data center, meaning that there are not much stake in your same data center, and you are performing well, you probably will be on the top positions of the rank. Also, if you are one of the concentrated validators, the validators that conform the Nakamoto coefficient, we will also try to unstake from you and distribute in the other long list of 450 validators we are staking into.
Solana, to its credit, has the only functioning ecosystem of stake pools that actually redistribute stake amongst a permissionless set of validators. To my knowledge, no other blockchain has cultivated this functionality. As an independent validator in search of stake, Throbac made efforts towards the three largest stake pools on Solana: Marinade, JPool, and Socian. Thus far, we were only able to achieve eligibility for delegation from Marinade. The delegation we would receive for our validator is around 10,000 SOL, so a pretty good start. One thing that surprised me during this process was the relatively low percentage of staked SOL in staked pools. In aggregate, that number is around 9 million SOL. That's a little over 2% of about 390 million total staked SOL. I asked FP, co-founder of Socian, why they thought the percentage was so low when stake pools offer such obvious value to decentralization.
Yeah, so that's actually a great question, and it is a question that I've been thinking about for the last 6 months. Right now, it's evident that I think stake pools haven't yet found product market fit, right? For whatever reason, right? And it could be sort of like tax reasons, right? Like when you stake into a stake pool, like that could be construed as sort of capital gains under US. Right, that could be like a major hurdle for adoption, right? It could just be like people don't want to pay stake pool. Like, one of the big sort of like wins of stake pools is like you get, how do you say, like, you get sort of like a liquid, like you get sort of diversification, right? So there's two things, right? One is diversification, and second is liquidity, right? And some people will be like, well, I don't really want to diversify, right? I like Shinobi, or I like this validator, I like this one, right? Or I have a good relationship with these guys, right? And so I don't actually want to split my stake over like 10 or 20 or 400 validators, and that's very sort of like reasonable, at least in terms of sort of like, I think that it's a little bit different, like compared to like equities, for example, right? Which is that even if you're sort of like in love in Apple, you probably still want to diversify. I think for validators, like the good validators tend to consistently stay good, right? The benefit to sort of decentralization is a little bit less in sort of traditional equities, right? Like stake pools haven't yet found sort of like product market fit. I haven't yet found sort of adoption. There are also sort of like smart contract risks, right? Like as in like, even though sort of like our contracts have been audited like 3 times, right? A lot of eyes have looked at it at this point. It's open source, right? Even then, sort of like, it's an additional layer over sort of like the staking program, right? And some people may still be uncomfortable with that. So there are a lot of reasons why sort of like stake pools haven't yet found adoption. And
so there's a few friction-related reasons, but the one that seems most potent was the tax implication. Sunny, one of the co-founders at JPool, also hit on the tax implication for large holders and discussed some things they were considering to combat the issue.
Yeah, we might, for example, at some point launch an option where you don't exchange your SOL for JSOL, but you simply get the pool's help in distributing your SOL in such a way that is best for decentralization of the blockchain, and also optimizing your APY and watching out for the validators dropping in performance, which is also an obvious value of the stake pool, because you don't need to look at your validator every day and make sure that everything is going smoothly, and you don't need to move your stake immediately because the validator went offline or suddenly raised their commission from like 1% to 20% or something. So doing that without the actual exchange of SOL into JSOL, so without generating a tax event, it's something that we might be doing this year.
Which brings us to Throbac's performance. I wanted to take a second to clearly outline our revenue and costs over the past few months to see how they stacked up against our expectations from episode 1. Currently, Throbac has a personal stake of 100 SOL. As you heard, this is the minimum required to be considered for stake pool delegations, so keep that in mind. Our only delegation for our first 2 months was the 10K SOL from Marinade. We put our validator at 5% commission, but we are currently considering lowering that number to help attract more stake. With those top line figures and a SOL price of around $35 at time of recording, here's what our P&L looks like. For revenue from our self-stake, we're making $17.50 a month. And for delegations, we are making $87.50 a month. So not a particularly significant sum. On the cost side, voting is costing us $630 a month, or about 18 SOL. This is actually less than anticipated, given Solana epoch times have started to increase over the past several months. Longer epoch times aren't good long-term, as they reduce rewards paid out by the network, but they do keep costs lower for new entrants like us. Our hardware costs are $750 a month. We needed to upgrade from our Lumen machine to one of the Equinix servers. We were experiencing some performance issues about a month in, and after some help from folks in Discord, shout out to Yorick from Crypto Manufacturer and Michael from Lane and StakeWiz, we learned that there's a hardware sweet spot that we just couldn't overcome with that Lumen machine. So in total, we're in the red about $1,275 a month. I wanted to close the number crunching portion of the episode by sharing a few important ones that I've learned through this process. So the TX fee break even. This is the point at which your validator starts producing enough blocks that you're not spending money in vote fees. This number is around 250,000 SOL. The self-stake only, so this is your stake where you're getting 100% of the rewards. The break-even for that is 8,000 SOL at a price of $35. The delegation-only break-even number is 150,000 SOL. One thing we're missing that nearly all profitable validators have is what I'll call institutional or large holder delegations. Research amongst the 50 most profitable validators will reveal that those entities almost unilaterally have a few large delegators that make up the majority of their stake. Thus far, Throbac has not found or earned any such patrons. I brought back Chris Remus from Chainflow to discuss this phenomenon and what an independent validator might do about it.
The first thing that comes to mind is, I think, putting that in perspective.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at Solana Beach, you can see how many delegations each validator has. So if you start at the top 26, you'll see that a few have a lot of delegations. And then I would say many have very few delegations. And even among the few that have many delegations, if you click on the validator name, do a sort by delegation amount, you'll probably see that most of them rely on a very small number of very big delegations, and Chainflow is included. You'll see that, we have, last I checked, we have, somewhere around like 3,500 delegations, which we feel really grateful for. At the same time, most of our stake comes from, probably 2 or 3 big delegations. And I say that for 2 reasons. One, because I think most validators with big stakes, or most validators who are doing better than breaking even, if I had to guess, also rely on a small number of large delegations. And then at the same time, if you look at other validators that have a lot of delegations, such as I think Everstake, for example, from what I understand, Everstake has an exclusive deal with Exodus, so that Everstake is getting a lot of their delegations from the Exodus wallet. So it seems like most of the validators who are doing better than breaking even have some combination of exclusive deals with wallets to receive delegation and or are relying on a few very large delegations.
We'll come back to this with a little more optimism in a moment. Right now, I wanted to go into a later part of my conversation with Chris. A little pivot. I want to talk about the 4 big takeaways I feel like I've got thus far, that I feel like if I wanted people to walk away from this little mini series with anything, what would those things be? So the first one is a callback to the first episode. I think that having a mentor or a group of folks with the knowledge you lack is indispensable to trying to do this, especially if you're not somebody who comes from a DevOps background, but you are interested in running infrastructure for all the reasons we've outlined. I think I've done a pretty good job of this, and I definitely wanted to thank you for helping me get all of this started.
I'm happy to help. I'm glad you reached out when you did way back when, and we've stayed in touch and we've continued to build and strengthen our collaboration. So I've enjoyed it, and it feels hopeful to hear that some of what I was able to do you found beneficial.
Yeah. The second thing was do it as a team. In a vacuum, all of things considered, I'd say 2 feels like, from what I know now, is the right number for validator operation to keep costs down, but also keep yourself sane. And try, this is me speaking to the listener, try as much as you can to have one of those members be not US based for Solana, because it does seem like the foundation delegation is pretty integral to people getting started, the possibility of having a sustainable validator. The third takeaway that I had is, although, as kind of illustrated here, it's tough and pricey, right now is the cheapest, lowest barrier to entry it will likely ever be to run a Solana validator. Network inflation and the subsidy is going to go down, so there's going to be more reliance on TX fees, which is the fees from producing blocks in the future. So that's only going to increase the amount of stake that you need to be profitable. And with that, the longer time passes, the more competitive I think the market is going to be. I think it'll probably reach a saturation point at some point, but I don't think we're there yet. So I think the idea of heading into the burning building instead of running away from it, is probably the right metaphor here. And Sol is I don't want to, cheap is maybe not the best word, but it is over 80% off the high. Doesn't mean it can't go down further, but if you believe in the long-term prospects of the network, it's definitely as good a time as any to start. And my final takeaway, and this is where I'll bring you back in, Chris, is at this stage, I think a validator must also create a flagship project, something that lasts, something that is a consistent, useful resource for the community. Validation, as efficient or low fee as you can be, doesn't really feel to me like enough. And this brings back to our point about how you might find, larger delegators. I think it's through a community project, through gaining visibility, through something that you're doing for the community beyond a good faith operation of a validator. So I would ask you, do you agree with that last statement? Do you think that that's probably pretty necessary at this point? Or do you think it shouldn't be necessary? Or wondering your thoughts.
That brings me back to something that I was going to mention before we got here, but we got here. So I think the case of StakeWiz is an interesting one. I don't know them personally, but I've interacted with them, particularly during some of the recent network shutdowns or halts, whatever word you choose to use for it. And I think it was a couple months ago, they were not anywhere close to being in the Nakamoto coefficient, but after their leadership during one of the network shutdowns, they quickly jumped into the Nakamoto coefficient. So my guess is that some large holder, wanted to show their appreciation for their work, and as a result, shifted delegation, or made a big delegation that got Stakewiz into the active set. So to me, that's a really hopeful example of how a validator could get into the active set. My sense is that they're a small team, an independent operator. I haven't verified that. It's only my sense, but it felt hopeful to see that. And in terms of talking about a product, I don't know if it has to be a product, but it has to be some tangible way that people see that a validator is creating value. I think it's two things. I think it's one, you either have the relationships or you don't. And my experience, the larger validator operators have locked up the relationships with the institutions for the most part. So that leaves, so conversely, or in somewhat of a contradiction, that leaves the smaller independent operators with being the ones that have to get the delegations by creating tangible value. And of course, it's the smaller independent validators that typically have fewer resources, so it's harder to contribute, significant value. But I do think any effort is appreciated. The challenge is, how do you get that effort recognized these days? And maybe building a product is one way, or contributing in some other meaningful way is another. But I think the key there is figuring out how you can create value within the community. And then just as importantly, if not more so, is getting that value recognized. And that is really, really hard. At least I find that's really, really hard without a lot of marketing resources. So I think that's one of the conundrums that smaller operators like ourselves find ourselves in. It's how can we create value because we're resource constrained? And then when we do create that value, how can we make sure that value is actually seen? So I think that's the challenge. I don't think it's impossible. I do think it takes a lot of focus and a lot of effort. And it's not, I don't think people are going to be necessarily recognized only for their efforts and, the merit of their contributions. I think to cut through the noise, especially on, within the Solana community right now, there has to be a concerted push to get those contributions out in front of the community in a very, very visible way.
All right, we've reached the end of the line. I've given my 4 concrete takeaways. 1, find a mentor. 2, find a non-US based team or teammate. 3, do it now. And 4, be prepared to offer value outside your validator operation. But where are we going? Where is Throbac going from here? Well, in the interest of taking our own advice, we are retooling our strategy a bit. We're in the early stages of combining forces with other validators around not just Solana validator operation, but something that will create value for the community. This project is called the Staking Defense League. It's a burgeoning cohort of independent validators working together to share information and support each other as we attempt to operate sustainable, values-aligned businesses in the crypto infrastructure space. Over the past couple months, we've been working to create programs that will support decentralization in the Solana ecosystem and hope to launch a validator together as a signal of that commitment. But more on that to come. As you've hopefully gathered from this, let's call it the beginning of the long and winding validator roadmap. It's hard out here. But in my personal opinion, the work is worth it. We believe that the future of permissionless, transparent, and equitable proof-of-stake systems depends on it. If you're interested in joining us, follow on Twitter at Staking Defense or message me personally at Throbac Kevin. We'll be happy to have you. Till next time.